In the latest episode of Ready to Love, the getaway ends and the ladies get the power to eliminate, and it couldn't come at a worse time for the men as the question of who decided to call Jessica combative becomes a big issue and none of the men want to fess up. So to start off, Sierra gets eliminated, and after that everyone goes back into the getaway house and the question is asked, who is the one that inspired Maria to call Jessica combative? And don't get us wrong, Maria is held accountable for even using that word because he could have decided not to share that kind of feedback, but either way, Jessica decides to ask all the men in the room. Maria says it wasn't him, Phil says it wasn't him, Quentin doesn't say it, and even Chris, who's the one who did say it in the deliberations, doesn't. And it just leaves Jessica in a really odd place to the point where she feels the need to be by herself for a while. Meanwhile, Janelle, since Jessica and her are close, she decides to not necessarily stir the pot, but definitely make it clear that she doesn't like how things went down, and that affects the elimination process. But beyond that, one of the things that a lot of people are starting to really think about and look into is who is really your first choice and who is your backup. For as shown, Lee is still trying to get some quality time with Quentin, but Janelle keeps that from happening. Chris, even though it seemed that he was perfectly fine with Aries and Phil becoming a thing, he's now kind of doubling back on that situation and trying to at least reestablish himself. And because Phil does... what's the best way to put it? The way Aries makes it seem, she definitely likes Phil, but because of the way Phil talked about his stability in the past, she isn't sure if that's necessarily the guy for her. And with that, that's what gives Chris room to potentially come back into the picture. Now, as for Katarina, once again, when it comes to Katarina, you can tell that her first choice is obviously Quentin, but Maria is the one who's potentially more available since after this blow up with Jessica, his second time messing up with her, there is a potential there, and you can see she wants to will herself into potentially liking him and not putting him in the friend zone, but he's just so chill, calm, and cool, but not necessarily what she finds sexy, it seems. So with that, while the relationship may be getting deeper since they share a spiritual connection, it doesn't seem like it's going to get romantic. Which leads into who gets into the bottom two, and it's once again Maria. But surprisingly, joining him isn't Phil, who has these issues with stability and only seemingly being stable for the last 4 months, but instead it's Chris. And mind you, at this point, Lee, Aries, and also Katarina had some interest in Chris. So the fact that Phil, who only had one woman interested in him, versus a guy who had 3, and yet he's in the bottom 2, it's very confusing. It doesn't feel like it makes sense or is right. Yet at the same time, you can't discount the fact that Jessica is 100% sure Chris is the one that called her combative. Add in that Janelle is tag teaming in terms of putting Chris down. And even though most of the ladies don't seem to really have major issues with Chris in a way that could put him in the bottom 2, ultimately he's the one that ends up there, and he even gets eliminated. But to add insult to injury, they don't have Aries eliminate him, they don't have Kat or Lee, they have Jessica eliminate him. And when she says you're not ready to love, he goes off. I'm talking about cursing and just giving you the type of performance we have not seen thus far this season when it comes to eliminations. And all I can say is with every passing episode, I look forward more and more to the reunion show. Which leads to the predictions, and I'm going to assume we're not going to be eliminating no more men since I think we're now officially down to 3. Since it's Quentin, it's Phil, and Maria. So in terms of the next elimination, which should be at the Meet the Family episode, which is coming up next, it's the women's turn to get potentially eliminated, and I feel like it has to be Lee. To me, Lee, with Chris now gone, what are her options? I mean, technically Katarina too, what are her options since Aries and Phil locked in. Quentin and Janelle, even though Lee and Katarina would like to think they still have a chance, they're locked in. And then with Marius, almost everybody put him in the friend zone except Jessica, so why are they still here? I mean, what does it take for you to understand that Quentin don't want you? He's not going to establish boundaries with Janelle or even push her back a little bit so he can explore and have more love interest in the journey. So at this point, I don't know if they're going to self-eliminate. It would make sense for them to, but either way, I don't see it for them. And in terms of the final three, obviously Janelle and Quentin, Maria and Jessica is a good chance, and Phil and Aries potentially, depending on if she feels that his stability is a real big problem, especially after she meets his family and assumingly he meets hers. So, notable highlight has to be the way Chris left, and that's just because it's always the quiet ones that flip out like that. It is when they do it, it's just out of nowhere. It's so weird, and then because the woman, since more often than not it's the man who flips out, and she's just sitting there just like watching their child have a tantrum, it makes it even more hilarious. And then when Chris during the confessional calls her evil, I'm just like, it's sad in a way because he seems so calm, cool, and collected, so it makes it seem like maybe there is more that we have not seen, so that could potentially make us seem evil, but right now it just seems like he's had his ego bruised a little bit. And again, I'm so looking forward to the reunion show because I feel like there's context missing here, and while it's definitely going to lead to some real dramatic ghetto ass moments that I hate to see, at the same time, a part of me has to admit that that's gonna probably be my favorite part of the season since romance has not been. But with that said, I'm still very confused how Chris ended up in the bottom two, never mind eliminated. That deliberation technically should have been Janelle and Jessica against Aries, Katarina, and Lee. And last time I checked, Lee and Katarina don't like Janelle, and I bet they don't really like Jessica either. And as for Aries, I just can't imagine her really putting Chris to the pasture rather than having it be Maria, since I don't think her and Maria ever had any type of connection. I mean, granted, they could be friends, and she could maybe be doing this to keep the peace in some kind of way, but it still doesn't make a lot of sense. And if there was ever a time I wish we got to hear more of the deliberation beyond who's in your top, who's in your bottom, and a recap of the dates we already seen, that would have been the moment, because that final decision, something just ain't connected for me. Overall, pretty much, I'm just here to the reunion show. With Phil and Aries on a decline, Janelle and Quentin in this space where it doesn't seem like they were romantic and they really found their person, but more so Janelle kind of latched on and Quentin doesn't want to or even knows how to hurt her feelings or even figure out a way to be with her but still explores other options. That's where they're at. And then when it comes to Jessica and Maria, I'm trying to stay in the mindset of what I said in the last episode recap in terms of not every relationship has to be overtly romantic, but at the same time it still very much feels like process of elimination, with Maria choosing Jessica because she still gives him the time of day, and Jessica doing the same because ain't nothing else out there, and she sure as hell ain't trying to go after Quentin because she already knows what would happen if she did that with Janelle as her friend.